The day the human world and the digital world fused was a rupture in reality, as though existence itself had torn a seam down the middle and allowed two separate fabrics to interweave. Earth cities now stood adjacent to chrome-plated forests of data, skyscrapers brushing the edges of infinite code streams. Amidst this confluence, the inhabitants had no choice but to adapt. Humans, now miniature compared to their digital neighbors, were dwarfed by the Digimon who had crossed over. Buildings once suited for millions were shielded by sentinels of muscle, fur, scale, and data. Towering Digimon became living guardians of civilization, protecting cities like Tokyo, Paris, and New York by sheer scale alone. Among them was Renamon, a vixen of golden fur, shimmering eyes, and lithe, thunderous grace. In the sprawling city of New Tokyo, which was a hybrid of Shibuya's bustling energy and the crystalline obelisks of the digital realm, Renamon stood watch, protecting the humans who now lived within her territory. Among them was David. He was only 25 millimeters tall, an artist who had once painted murals on subway walls. He now lived tucked safely behind Renamon's shoulder fur, swaddled in warmth and protected from gusts and tremors by her movements. From his very first encounter with her, she watched over him with undying love. The rift storm came without warning. A cosmic glitch in the fusion code between worlds, tearing open a hole that let hostile viruses through. Jagged, semi-sentient Digimon, twisted abominations who wanted neither peace nor balance. The sky fractured into rivers of red and black as corrupted Megadramons soared over cityscapes, their wings shattering glass everywhere. Renamon was like a blade of divine judgment. She launched herself into the chaos immediately. Her limbs struck like meteorites as she battled to shield the city. But then came the monstrous Oblivion. A single swipe from his jagged claws could level a district. She knew she couldn't let David remain on her body. So, in a protective moment, she slipped him into her mouth. He slid between her lips easily, as if her supple lips welcomed him into her warm mouth. It was so warm it relaxed him in this chaotic moment. David had once lived in apartments no bigger than Renamon's single canine tooth. Now he lived beneath a tongue. Nestled within the wet, spongy recesses under the massive muscle that was Renamon's tongue, David discovered an environment that was, paradoxically, the warmest, wettest, and most sensual space he had ever known. The initial fear had long passed. What remained was a near-spiritual sense of home. Her breath rose and fell around him with the sweetest scent. Each inhale brought with it a rush of fresh, sweet warmth. Her scent was so earthy and electric, like ozone and citrus flowers. Her warm, wet saliva slicked every surface continuously like hot tub when you first get in. The tongue itself was humongous, relatively speaking. It was easily 20 times his size, but it was gentle. It flexed and undulated beneath him, working with his presence in her mouth. He was so grateful. He had made a home in the sublingual cradle, that gentle curve where her tongue met the floor of her mouth. He felt that hidden area of her mouth to be so sexy. There, the tissue was slightly thinner, but just firm enough, almost like a heated alcove. It pulsed faintly with her heartbeat, which made him feel at home. And so, with a big sigh, David relaxed. She knew he liked it there. In fact, Renamon had been adjusting her posture just slightly when he was in her mouth, reclining her head and angling her jaw to avoid compressing his nest. She never spoke with him inside, only hummed gently, creating long, melodic vibrations that flowed through her tongue and into his body. David's body responded with waves of pleasure. The vibrations of her tongue gently caressed his tiny body with her moist saliva, bathing him in warming sensuality. He loved those hums. Mornings were marked by gentle motion. He would awaken to the subtle shift of Renamon rising, her tongue curling slightly around him as she yawned. It was a careful movement, designed to keep him safe and unshaken, but it always brought a ticklish joy. He'd laugh softly as her taste buds, each one the size of his fingertip, brushed against his back while her tongue rolled under him like a tide. His bath came next. Renamon had such a generous flow of saliva that pools would often collect along the back of her mouth during sleep. He would walk barefoot through these puddles. The texture was a consistency of something between water and oil. He had fashioned a tiny cloth from nanothread to dry off afterward, though sometimes he simply let the humid air do the work. He had even discovered sweet spots on her tongue. He found areas where the texture changed, or when her saliva secreted a faint citrus note that would get his tiny body excited as he inhaled the beauty of the smell. These became his favorite lounging areas. He often lay on his back there, watching the curved roof of her mouth high above, telling himself how lucky he was for her to be gracious enough to allow him inside her beautiful mouth. On some days, she would open her mouth just slightly for him, letting light filter in through her teeth. Sunbeams would pour across the shiny surfaces like spotlights, illuminating the gorgeous pink and gold hues of her inner mouth. That was when he would sketch on treated sheets of micropaper that stuck gently to moist surfaces. His drawings often included the arches of her palate, the curves of her molars, and most of all, the muscle beneath him. Sometimes he would talk to himself. He wasn't sure she could hear him clearly through her mouth, so he would often pretend. He talked about the world outside, about how peaceful it was here, inside of her. David had begun to treat her tongue and mouth like his new world, a place to explore. He named parts of it like cities on a map. The ridgeway was the central groove running along the middle. The wetlands were the glossier edges near her cheeks, where saliva pooled deepest, and the hollow root was the base of the tongue, where the muscle anchored and curled toward her throat. He climbed it for daily exercise, his tiny feet gripping onto taste buds, walking the slick slopes with suction boots made by a tech-savvy Digimon artisan. Each step was cushioned and springy. Sometimes, when he was playful, he would run and slide across her tongue during her rest cycles. The friction of her warm saliva against his bare skin was electrifying. He would laugh until her whole mouth hummed with her sleepy amusement. David would often get just as excited as she would. How could he not with the wetness of her saliva covering his whole body? After the battle was finally won, Renamon lifted him gently from her mouth, blinking at him with those deep sapphire eyes and whispering, "Are you all right?" He looked back into the warm darkness and said, "Can I stay?" And she had smiled. Renamon opened her mouth and let David crawl beneath her tongue, as usual. But then she sighed. He lay against the curve of her tongue and whispered up to her, "You did well today." There was a pause. Then the faintest press of her tongue lifted him slightly, as if she were nuzzling him from below. "I only did well," she whispered so softly that the chamber trembled, "because I had you in here with me." David smiled and curled into the curve of her flesh, letting the warmth of her words wrap around him like a second skin. "Can I travel deeper into your magnificent body?" David asked shyly. "Maybe into your stomach?" "You're so strange," Renamon replied, "but I like you a lot." When David needed time to himself, away from Renamon's tongue, he simply tapped a practiced pattern on the underside of her tongue with his hands. Renamon always understood. With a careful tilt of her head and a tender swallow, she sent him sliding downward. The journey into her throat was a miracle in itself. He entered the smooth tunnel of her esophagus, where the walls hugged him with warmth. Above him, he could hear the muted sound of her heartbeat and the whisper of her breath. When he emerged into her stomach, it was like stepping into another world. Renamon's stomach was nothing like the burning pit humans would imagine. A thick, sweet mist was in the air, smelling faintly of nectar and wildflowers. Ponds of clear, non-corrosive fluid collected in gentle basins across the floor, giving the place a dreamlike landscape. Sometimes, he swam in them, floating lazily on his back, gazing up at the ceiling, where Renamon's muscles contracted slowly, in unison with the beat of her heart. David made little camps along the folds of her stomach lining. He fashioned hammocks from webbed silk Renamon had gifted him and tiny lamps that created ambient light the air. Sometimes he slept here for days, letting her body soothe him deeper than any sleep he had underneath her tongue. And he wasn't alone. "Are you comfortable?" Renamon whispered affectionately. David stretched out inside of her body and whispered back, "Always." He could feel her everywhere, in the tremors of her muscles contracting, the slow slide of fluid through unseen veins, the pleasantness of her breathing. He pressed his hand against the stomach wall. For a long moment, he just stayed like that, breathing with her. Then, acting on a feeling he didn't entirely understand, he kissed the wall with a brush of his lips against her living body. He felt his whole body electrify with pleasure once more. The reaction was immediate. He felt Renamon's body start quivering, her body's walls tightening gently around him and releasing again with every contraction. A low, warm hum filled the space, a sound of pure affection that made David's body feel like pure ecstasy. It was like her entire body was loving him. In that moment of ecstasy, David realized he didn't want to leave her mouth or her body. He didn't want to live anywhere else but inside her. He wanted to feel this pleasure over and over again. After finishing up the romantic moment inside of her stomach, David started making his way back towards her mouth. David climbed back up her esophagus with her careful assistance. When he finally emerged once again into the moist cradle of her mouth, Renamon was waiting. She was lying on her side now, muzzle slightly open, sighing with deep, heavy breaths. She was cradling him between her tongue and the roof of her mouth. Her half-open blue eyes shimmered with deep love as she stared into deep nothingness. She opened her mouth just wide enough to speak, voice a tender breath over his body. "David, you could stay forever." He smiled, soaked to the bone with her warmth. "I want to," he whispered. Renamon drew him further into her mouth, letting her tongue curl up and around him, holding him close. It was a full-body embrace, warm, wet, and utterly intimate. Each ripple of her muscle was a caress. Each droplet of her saliva was a kiss. She hummed, a low purr that traveled through her entire body. That night, David explored every inch of her.